ready to begin. Welcome. My name is James Kitchen. I work in the Office of the County Executive in Community Engagement and Constituent Services. But thank you all so much for coming here. This is an awesome crowd. This kind of public participation is really, really exciting and encouraging, especially on a topic that we're really, really excited about. So thank you for being here. So the purpose of this event is we're going to explain the administration's plan to save a lot of trees. We're going to explain that to you, and then we'd love to hear your comments and questions and any feedback you have. And Matt Johnston is going to do the explaining, and then the county executive is obviously going to talk about his vision and why this is important. And again, we're really excited to be able to hear from you. After they do their presentation, we will have, again, time for you to ask questions. We're going to do that from the center mic. I will give everyone 2 minutes to ask their question, and I'm going to hold you to that 2 minutes. I will time it and ask you to just hurry up and summarize if you get close towards the end. There's a lot of people here. We want to be able to handle as many questions as we can in the time that we have. I also ask that you keep your questions and comments on topic. This is a town hall. The county executive is here. There are times where people, want to know about other things, and we want to answer those questions. You can email me, call me tomorrow. We will do our best to answer whatever question you have tonight. As much as we can, we want to stay focused on conservation, forest conservation, and saving these trees. So I do want to take time to recognize a lot of the community organizations that are here. There are a lot of them, so bear with me. I apologize in advance if I mispronounced any names or if anyone walked in after we got these lists. But we have Sue Bell here from the Watershed Stewards Master Academy and from the Heritage Harbor. Maria Del Bianca is here from Neighbors of the Mayo Peninsula. Justin Poliska is here from Prask with the Anne Arundel County Public Schools. We have Melanie Hartwick Davis here from the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, the CAC, and the Lock Haven Civic Association. Reed Perry is here from the Chesapeake Conservancy. Bud Peaver is here from the Anne Arundel County Forestry Board. Rob Reed from Annapolis Roads. Dakota Lawson from the Scenic Rivers Land Trust. Kel Martinez from the Advocates for Herring Bay. Chris Eberly from the Anne Arundel Bird Club. Richard E. Walden he's the president of the Magna Vista Area Civic Association. Randy Williams is here. She lives in the Idlewild Road Subdivision and Civic Association down in Shadyside. Lisa Bender from SRA, GSPC, WSA, and Carrollton Manor. Carolyn Ricketts is here, again from SRPCA, WSA, and the CSGA. Jan Atwood from the Broadneck Creek Condominium in Heritage Harbor. Pat Lynch from Broadneck Council, and GAN. Someone is here from the MRA, and Ad Cookson is here, is also here from GAN. So we want to take the time to read those because, yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I decided, but I'm League of Women Voters, Susan Conklin.
We have Susan Conklin from the League of Women Voters. Is there anyone else here from groups and organizations that we didn't announce? Yes, ma'am. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Anyone else? You're good.
I'm good.
All right. Well, we want to take the time. Yes. Crofton First is here. Thank you for being here. We want to take the time to actually. Yes, sir. Anne Arundel County Public Water Access Commission. Thank you for being here.
Oyster Harbor Citizen Association and Sierra Club Bureau.
Welcome. Anyone else? And I think it's important for us to recognize these groups because we're working with you and the people you represent. It's just really, really important that you all have a seat at the table and that we're hearing your voice, as it is that we hear everyone that has come here. So again, thank you. I do want to recognize the former and present elected officials that are here. We have Marcia Perry here. She's a former delegate from District 33. We have Adam Spangler here from Congressman Brown's office. Adam. And is there any other elected official or someone representing an elected official here, not including the councilwoman who's going to get the chance to come up and speak in a minute? But is there any other elected officials? Okay, so for that, we do have Councilwoman here. That's a tongue twister. But since we are in her district, we wanted to give her a minute to come up and just welcome everybody. So Councilwoman.
I just told James he's putting me on the spot up here.
echo his sentiments. The fact that we have this amount of public participation and the number of groups we have represented from across the county is phenomenal. We love to see this. This makes my job easier because I get to hear from more of you, so that when this bill comes before the council, I have a better understanding of how you all view it and what you think, and whether or not it strikes the right balance or whether it needs to be tweaked. So I am especially looking forward to hearing not only the presentation from Mr. Johnson, but also to hear the specific comments that you have and why, what's your motivation behind that. So I thank you for all of that. I don't know exactly what the presentation is going to show. I assume it has a lot of good data behind it, because I know Mr. Johnson really likes data. So I love that too. I'm excited to kind of get into the nitty-gritty and the weeds of it, and I hope that you all participate a lot. So thank you very much for coming, and welcome to District 7 if you don't live here.
And with that, I want to invite up the county executive to give us some thoughts.
Yeah, I made James read all those organizations. He said, "Are you sure we have pages and pages of them?" But it's impressive how many organizations there are in this county that are working on all community issues, particularly environmental issues. So I'm not surprised to see a lot of you here, but I'm really glad to see you here. So it's a little bit different to do what we're doing. I mean, we do town halls all the time, everywhere, because it's what I like to do in the evenings, I guess. But it's to meet with all of you. But to do a town hall on a bill that hasn't been introduced yet is a little bit different. Normally what happens is that the bill gets introduced, and then you go through the process of having public comment and hearings through the county council. And you'll still get that opportunity with this bill, because it hasn't actually been introduced to the council yet. But we wanted to make sure that we got input from as many places as we could as we tweak the bill and get the details right. There is a draft of it. The plan is to introduce it at the September 3rd meeting, but the hearing won't come until after that. So we're still in the process of putting it all together. So when you comment, we're going to be writing things down and potentially making changes in the current draft. But it's also important, I found, that anything that has to do with land use is right now really something that we have to get out into the communities, every community in the county, because people care about it. I think I was elected because of land use issues primarily. And we have our Citizens Advisory Committee of doing the General Development Plan right now. And there has been some debate over whether we should be changing land use laws now or whether we should wait and do it after the General Development Plan. And I've argued that in some cases, for things that really have a big impact and that are important and that we as an administration know we have to do, that by doing it now in advance, the rules will have changed and we can make a general development plan using the new rules. And for anybody who owns land and is thinking about developing it, that's useful as well, because you know what the rules are going to be going forward and whether or not it's appropriate to be asking for a rezoning in the comprehensive rezoning based on what the rules are going to be. So forest conservation is, it checks off a lot of boxes for me and I think a lot of you. One of the things in this county that I want to get away from is sprawl development that spreads out everywhere, and do smart growth where it's more targeted and transit-oriented development, and that agenda can be pushed by forest conservation if it's more difficult, more expensive to cut down trees. We hope it drives development into redevelopment areas where there are no trees. Stormwater is probably the most common complaint that our constituent service people hear, whether it's because of development or because of a lot of rain or whatever it is, that flooding is getting worse, that people's property is being inundated, and there's no question about it. We pay our fee. We have our watershed restoration and protection folks doing projects that are expensive to deal with the runoff, but we know that a forest absorbs water like nothing else on this planet. It was the original stormwater management plan created by God, I guess, and so we need to preserve our forests for that reason. And we have our TMDL goals for cleaning up the bay, and if we want to absorb those nutrients before they get into the bay, a forest is the best way to do it. And we are all confronting the crisis of climate change, and the way that forests store carbon is also a really great invention, and it works really well, better than anything else. So there are a lot of reasons to preserve our forests. Anne Arundel County's performance on forest conservation has been pretty abysmal by any standard if you look at the numbers. So since 2010, with our Bay cleanup efforts, we started keeping track of a lot of these numbers. Anne Arundel County's lost 2,775 acres of forest. That is more than Prince George's, Howard County, Calvert County, Baltimore County, and Baltimore City combined. It's more than all of our surrounding jurisdictions combined in forest loss. In fact, it's 40% of all the forest loss in the state of Maryland in those years. That to me shows that even in a place where we have a lot of environmental voters and where we have 530 miles of shoreline where we know that we're trying to preserve forests, we're losing it way faster than anybody else. So the question is why we failed in these years to preserve our forests, and primarily I would say it's weak legislation, and that's what we're addressing. It's the replacement ratio is you replace 1 acre for every 4 that you lose, but worse than that is that before you have to start replacing anything, you can clear cut 68 acres of your 100 acres of forest before any replacement has to be made. And then if you don't replace, you pay into the fee in lieu is 40 cents per square foot, which is nowhere near what it costs to actually replant that amount of forest. So all of those are dials that I'll let Matt talk about, and he's come up with a very exciting way of adjusting all those dials to get where we want to be, I think. The other problem is our reforestation funds have been, I don't know if they've been misspent or they've just disappeared, but you've read a lot of newspaper articles in the last few years about failure to account for that money. It was $8 million at one point. It disappeared fast. I know Matt's done a lot of research on where that went, but it's been very difficult to track. The last $2.5 million was a check written to the developer of Turtle Run after the Critical Area Commission decided he couldn't develop his land, and so we bought the land with the forest conservation money at the value that it would have been had he been able to develop it. There's nothing we can do about that now. That money is gone, so we're starting from scratch. But the bottom line for me is that the land use decisions in this county, in my view, have for way too long been driven by politicians who rely on developers for campaign contributions, and that's why we're the clear-cutting capital of Maryland. So it's time to fix, I believe, the problem. We hired Matt Johnson as our environmental policy director to guide us and to work with all of our agencies on doing that. Before even getting to forest conservation and getting this bill ready to roll, he looked at modifications, and we sent out a directive that has made pretty clear to folks that modifications will be impossible to get on environmental factors if you're not overall improving the environmental situation on that site. So wetlands and steep slopes and specimen tree modifications are a whole lot more difficult to get than they used to be. Pretending that wetlands don't exist where they do, you don't have to go very far into the peninsula here to find Trimble Estates and Glebe Heights where they pretended that wetlands did not exist where they did. And so at Matt's urging, we have started to require that developers have to actually get proof from MDE of where the wetlands are before they move forward, so that our Planning and Zoning Office knows exactly what's there. But most importantly is, I think, this new forest conservation bill, which is different than what anybody has done in the state of Maryland. It's different from what anybody has done in city or county. And we think that it's a balanced approach, that it does not it's not a complete no net loss. It does not mean no more development in Anne Arundel County. It adjusts things in a way that if it had been in effect in 2017, instead of losing 400 acres, we would have actually gained 100 acres. But the reason we're here is to hear how this might work, hear from you about whether you think it should be changed. There are community people here, there are environmental advocates here, There are some development interested engineers here, and we want to hear from all of you. So let's get with it. Thanks.
Reese, you want to cut the lights? Hopefully this will be a little bit easier for folks to see. So thank you very much, County Executive. My pleasure to be here this evening. Whenever the County Executive was running on no net forest loss, and I had been working for 8 or 9 years with the Chesapeake Bay program, I picked up my head and I said, wow, this is something different. I need to get involved with this. So really excited to be here tonight. I feel like many of you in the room I've been working with for years on forest conservation and fixing, quite honestly, a broken bill passed in 1991. So let's get into the details of what we're trying to do. Next slide. Okay, so the county executive stole a little bit of thunder, but that's fine. It's great to repeat ourselves on the important points. We've lost 14% of all of our forested acres here in Anne Arundel County since the Forest Conservation Bill at the statewide level was passed in 1991. We lose about 300 acres every single year to development alone. That's acres that we do not get back through mitigation, replanting requirements. We've lost more acres since 2010, as the county executive said, than all neighboring counties combined. And this slide actually shows you, I think it's in your fact sheet as well, the red is Anne Arundel County, the yellow is all neighboring counties, and the green is all other counties in the entire state of Maryland combined. So we really are the leaders in the worst way. Next slide. So I want to show you a little bit of what this looks like. This is, I'm sorry that it's brown, but whenever you take a satellite image, to do it right, they do it in the winter. So this on the left is all forest, hundreds of acres of contiguous, intact, interior forest. Up in the northern part of the county, I know lots of people like to say, well, there's only forest in some parts of the county, there's nothing left up north or where there's a lot of urban areas. Well, here was one. It was in a greenway, the Marley Creek Greenway, and on the left is 2007, and on the right is 2018. So that interior contiguous forest, our best forests, are gone. Next slide. So what are we going to do to fix that problem, protecting our best forests? Well, there's one thing we can do in the Act, which is to redefine what we consider priority forest for protection. What that means is no one can go in and cut down these forests without a modification to the law. It's a very high standard. So some of the things that we have left out of our current Forest Conservation Act that we want to put back in are greenways. In 2002, the Office of Planning and Zoning wrote a greenways master plan, and on the left side of your screen there is the greenways map. It's all of our contiguous, intact forests with corridors that connect them, and we were supposed to pass legislation or give some funding to go ahead and prioritize preservation of those forests. Never happened. So 17 years later, we're doing it. Greenways will now be protected forests. So the other one is just kind of, you call it a technical thing. Stream and wetland buffers. In other places in our laws, we protect stream and wetland buffers from development. It was an oversight. It's not in the forest conservation law. Doesn't mean that there's any trees that are taken down in those areas, but we might as well add in stream and wetland buffers to be consistent across our laws. Then the last one is something that we stole from Prince George's County. They looked at the same thing we were looking at and saw that they were losing their best intact, contiguous, large parcels of forest. And they said, how can we stop this? And they brought in a definition of what interior forests look like. And they protected, they now say you have to get a modification to the law, or variance in Prince George's County, if you want to disturb any parcel of forest that's greater than 50 acres in size. So we're going to do the same thing. So next slide. So first we had to redefine what are our priority forest areas that cannot be cut down unless you have a modification. That's number one. Number two is we just have to allow less cutting whenever we say this isn't priority. So I want you to imagine that the squares on the screen here are 100-acre forested parcels, completely forested. Under the current law, you can cut down 68 acres without any replanting, without paying any fee in lieu. Under the draft bill, we've cut that down to 27. We've more than flipped it. So now you'll be able to, you have to retain 73 out of those 100 acres, and you may cut down 27. Next slide. But we don't stop there. There's another knob you can turn in the Forest Conservation Act, and that is, what are your replanting requirements? So there, we said how much you could cut down to start with. Now we're talking about how much you have to replant. On the left-hand side, if you had cut down half of that site, 50 acres under the current law, you would have to replant 0. Because remember, you could cut down 68 for free. Under the new law, if you're putting up mixed-use commercial development, this will go to 40 acres. You cut down 50, you're putting 40 back up. And a lot of people ask, well, how are you going to do that? Well, the law gives a lot of options. You can replant trees on-site. You can replant trees off-site. Maybe you have other development projects and you can take some of that area, or you just have other land, you can take some of that area and put trees on it. And then the preferred is usually you can go to a forest mitigation bank. Right now in Anne Arundel County, and let me explain what that is. A forest mitigation bank is whenever a private landowner, any of you, who have more than 2,500 square feet of land that is not treed, if you want to plant trees on it, you can get a credit from the county and sell that to a developer and say, I will allow you to purchase this credit and you can cut down trees under this law. So we have 0 of those credits available because our market is broken. So next slide. So how do we reset the market correctly so that we get the private forest mitigation banks going again? Well, right now, it costs 40 cents per square foot. You clear cut, you cut a small check, 40 cents per square foot, or 17,000 about dollars per acre. Now, if any of you can find land in Anne Arundel County, purchase it, and plant trees on it for 17,000, the county executive and I want to hire you because we can't figure that out. Our draft bill is going to push that up to $2.50 per square foot, or $109,000 per acre. Now I'll give you 2 things to put that into context for you. One is kind of some bookends for you. We are the lowest, amongst the lowest in the state for fee in lieu. Prince George's County continually ratchets theirs up. They're at 90 cents per square foot. We're talking about $2.50. The city of Annapolis is at $10 per square foot for $435,000 per acre. So just some bookends. But also, we didn't make this number up out of thin air. We went to Maryland Department of Natural Resources, and we actually asked them, we know that you all do ecosystem service analyses. How much does a parcel of land contribute to the ecosystem? We want to know what's the average ecosystem service for an acre of forest in Anne Arundel County. And they came back and they said over a 50-year period, the average would be $109,000 per acre. So that's our value of forest, and that's what we're going to set the price at. Now, the private market can completely underbid that, and we hope they do. We hope we never collect another dime in fee in lieu. Next slide. So I also wanted to say thank you, Councilwoman Hare. It has been a long road with a lot of data. This is not pulled out of thin air. This is a snapshot from my computer this afternoon, and this is the actual forest conservation equation that probably many of you in the room are familiar with. You have to run these on every development site. We played with this for the last 6 months to get to where we are today. Next slide. And so next steps, we're about to hear from you tonight. Really excited about that. We're going to hear from other citizens and stakeholders, and we already have. We're requesting the County Council introduce the bill on September 3rd, and then we're hoping there's a public hearing on the bill in October, and we hope to see you all there again. So I will hand it back to James now.
Thanks, Matt. So we're gonna start the public comment question period of this. So if I can invite the county executive and Matt back up, and they'll sit here in the stools. You can, I'm gonna turn this mic on. All right. So we have this mic in the middle. So if anybody has any questions, comments, on this topic for either Matt or the county executive. We'll invite you to come up 3 or 4 at a time, stand in line, and ask these questions again. I will time you for 2 minutes. Before the questions start, I did make a mistake in not recognizing the fact that we have our Director of Planning and Zoning and a lot of his staff here tonight. So if you want to raise, and if all your staff, if you work for Planning and Zoning, they are going to have to implement this. And so we are very happy that they are here with us tonight to both listen to it and to listen to your comments and everything. So if anybody has questions, we'll invite you up to this mic here, and I will give you 2 minutes each to ask them.
Hi, I'm Anna Hoffman. I live in Contra Cove. I have an easy question. I think it's for Matt. You just said that this applies to mixed-use development. What about residential development? Because we have a whole lot of that on the peninsula, so much so that our first responders have to close down the peninsula. It just happened 2 weeks ago with the Callahan house fire. I mean, it's not safe. I live in the neighborhood where the barricade happened a few years ago. We were trapped in our community for a day. So why is it only applying to mixed-use development? Why isn't it residential developers as well? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. It's not just mixed use. There's a spreadsheet behind this for every different land zone or use type in the county. Whether it's residential or agriculture or open space or commercial, every single one has to comply with this law. But that hypothetical square that I showed you, that was specific to mixed use. The numbers would just be slightly different for any other land use or zoning.
But roughly comparable? I mean, are they a lot smaller?
Roughly comparable. Right now, and they will stay roughly comparable.
I'm Rich Warden. I'm a trained environmental analyst. I have a question about existing invasive species. That's a big issue. If you go up and down, I live in Arundel, you go up and down Ritchie Highway, you'll see trees wrapped in vines. With the oncoming hurricane season, those trees are going to eventually come down. We already had one come down a couple of years ago, hit a bus. So what are they going to do about the existing invasive species is killing off the entire urban forest? What are we going to do about that?
That's a good one.
It's an easy question.
It is a good one.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And actually, we have some folks in the room from the Chesapeake Bay Trust and other organizations that receive grant dollars from Anne Arundel County through our Forest Conservation Fund and from the state. And they fund communities to do exactly what you're talking about. Take down the invasive species if a community applies for the grant before it becomes a problem. There's always limited dollars involved, but the grants are out there.
I think a prohibition on planting bamboo would help a lot too. Thank you.
Hi, Ted Weber. I live in Annapolis. I'm a forest and wetland ecologist. I'm really pleased to see this bill.
If you can speak into the microphone a little closer. That's good.
Yeah, my name is Ted Weber. I'm from Annapolis. I work as a forest and wetland ecologist. I'm really happy to see this bill because it's long overdue. And I like that you have priority retention areas, including greenways and fence habitat. I guess I have 2 questions. The first is having to do with forest quality or structure, which is determined in the forest stand delineation process, where would those high-ranking areas be included in priority retention areas? And then my second question has to do with how tightly the exemption process is. How easy will it be for a developer to get an exemption by saying, well, I won't make enough money if I can't clear the whole site?
Those are great questions. So on the first one on priority retention areas, yeah, I'll repeat the question. Priority retention areas, the question was, every time a development goes in, the first thing you do is you send out a consultant to map the forest on the land. And that comes back with a report to our Office of Planning and Zoning and says, this is a really good forest stand, this is a poor forest stand, here's some great trees, here's some poor trees, here's invasive species. And the question was, would the great trees, the good quality forests go into priority retention? No, not in this bill. But that is all information that planning and zoning and the administration can take when considering where the development goes. Whenever the developers say, I would like to go here, here, and here on the property, the question can come back, well, we saw in the forest stand delineation that was really high quality. It's not priority retention by the law, but would you consider XYZ, a different location? And then your second question, can you remind me of that one?
That has to do with how easy it is for a developer to get an exemption from the priority retention areas, whether they have, what is the standard of proof, what sort of proof do they have to show, and then can they claim economic hardship that they're not making enough money?
No. So the question was, can you claim economic hardship, you're not making enough money, and get a waiver to the law? No. Whenever we opened up this law and decided to change some things, some folks in the environmental community pointed out, hey, you know what? Your modification process actually isn't up to the state standard. Their process is harder. So we are making our process harder to fulfill the state standard.
Thank you.
And I just want to remind the people asking the question, speak into the mic and as loud as you can, even with the mic. We have a lot of people here, it's a big room, and they're having some trouble hearing in the back. And same goes for us as well.
In general, on modifications, I also want to say that the word on the street from the decades of the past is that the county executive gets to choose, gets to decide. In our administration, it's actually the planning officer, and I'm trying to keep a distance as much as possible. I've been pretty vocal when I think that a project is a bad project, but getting into the specifics of how all those rulings are made, it's not what I'm trained for, it's not what I should do. It puts me in a vulnerable position when people are trying to have political influence, and I'm trying to stay out of that. I also want to recognize Senator Sarah Alfred, you're a senator from this district. And I just have to tell you that she's probably simpering and very happy to be at this meeting and wouldn't miss it because she's actually losing a contest here. During the campaign, if you heard our joint stump speeches, we would both say that we were in a race to see who could pass a strong forest conservation bill first, the county or the state. We're getting to it first. We hope we get it passed, but I know she's going to play cleanup in the session if not.
One question and maybe one idea. Will this better protect forested areas conservation downstream from development? Because it seems our experience is that the downstream impact of development and maybe the policies and maybe the inspections are not always that clear.
Yeah, no, this bill, so the question was, will this bill protect forests and other properties off-site from erosion and things like that? No, but a different part of the law does. And what the administration is trying to do right now is there's a part of the law that says you cannot create off-site erosion or sediment deposition, sediment pollution off-site. We are trying to give our staff the tools to measure what that looks like, so that we can go on a construction site and justify, we see off-site erosion on a different property owner's property, and you're liable. We don't have the tools right now to do that, but our law is pretty clear that we can.
Great. And then maybe the other is an idea, thinking about the football team that just walked through, and thinking about the age of many of us here. You know, maybe this is an area of partnership with the school system to really have a conservation core where we have high school kids that are in science, environmental areas to really think about how do they work with us, with communities, to analyze, to evaluate, to assess things happening. So, 2 ideas.
And not just students, but also adults, and which is why Our funding this year for the Watershed Stewards Academy increased significantly so that they could hire some folks to expand their work.
County Executive,
Yes, sir.
Stephen Ferranti. I own a company called Maryland Land Advisors. I represent landowners and farmers when they sell for development. I have been doing that in the county for 22 years. Most of the land that would be for workforce housing or standard houses 300,000 to 500,000, sells for about $50,000 a building lot. So if you have R1 land, $50,000. How does putting a $108,000 impact fee on top of a normal impact fee not stop development?
So workforce housing, as you probably know, and affordable housing is something that I care a lot about.
Certainly.
And at the same time, we want to drive the development into areas where there are no trees. So transit-oriented development near the end of the light rail, near the Odenton train station, areas, they're going to put a new station in over at Laurel by the racetrack, and other areas where they're transit in particular. In Glen Burnie, there's communities that want redevelopment. So housing can happen there, and there's no forest conservation problem, and we have land that's available for that. And that's why I actually believe that in some cases allowing more density in those areas makes sense, because if you develop in a smaller land area, it's actually ecologically better, it's less of a footprint, and you certainly don't have to take down any trees.
So does that mean that the zoning will change in those areas to high density zoning, R10 or R16 or R22?
We're looking, well, the workforce housing bill does some of that, and that's been controversial, particularly the part that's had a density bonus for R5, and I actually believe that was a mistake, because there's not R5 that is likely to get workforce housing, but I think the parts that are effective are mixed use, industrial, warehouse, commercial, and as we do the general development plan, my hope is that we do make some changes in the law to allow more mixed use and allow more housing to be in these areas. What we've done that I think is a mistake in planning is to say, okay, this is a residential area, this is a commercial area, this is industrial, and so everybody's driving in cars constantly getting from one to the other. And in terms of workforce housing, we have people coming in who can't afford to live in the county, driving into work at jobs that don't pay a whole lot, that residents can't work at, and then we have people driving to DC and Baltimore. So it's a traffic issue as well. So that's why live, work, and play in one place, and transit-oriented development is the direction that I hope we go.
Good evening, my name is Heather, and I live in Crownsville on a family conveyance. The tract was originally 70 acres purchased by my father, and he had 5 children. He conveyed in 1999 across those 5 children and kept 45 acres for
Can you
his,
speak a little louder? They're having
kept
trouble.
45 acres for his primary residence. Ultimately, he put it in the forestry program, and before he died 2 years ago, the county acquired 45 acres. It's on the very tip of Bacon Ridge. And what that leaves me with are siblings who reside in California their entire adult lives with lots that they continue to shop to builders. I don't believe the land is currently not buildable without significant infrastructure, but I think it would be very valuable to be acquired and added to the Scenic River Trust. Is there any way that there is some sort of mechanism or program to acquire what is about 15 acres and perhaps almost arguably contiguous with Scenic River Trust, Bacon Ridge Greenway?
Last name Forney?
Close, it's Page, but I know Forney, yeah.
Yeah, we know about that property, and there is a plan to try to move on that to be able to expand the Bacon Ridge Natural Resource Area to include that property. It's a beautiful property. And I understand that forest conservation money had been used for Scenic Rivers Land Trust to be able to do this, and that it's a bit of a problem that the fund is depleted right now. But that's not the only source of fund. There's program open space and others. And so, our land acquisition strategy is largely to complement this forest conservation strategy, which is why that land is very appealing.
Okay, so would I?
But that's not a promise.
No, I understand, but it's,
Not in the budget.
it's been a long-term thing, and I would like to be able to support where I raise my children in my local community, and I think this would be a good way to solve what probably shouldn't have happened, which was this conveyance done in the fashion that it was. So, would you advise that I contact the Scenic River Trust as a first stop?
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Susan Cochran from the League of Women Voters and from Edgewater. And I just want to say how happy I am that you are tackling this, because I've been working for the League on the state level to try to get a better Forest Conservation Act. And it has not been easy. It's been stalled. So the fact that you're going to go over and above is very great. And I had a couple of questions. You talked about forest mitigation bank, and I wanted to know, you said it's not really functioning right now, or it's not, is there really potential for it in this county to function well? Is there land that could be put into trees, or is there hope that that will happen?
Sure, yeah, let me talk a little bit about, we didn't just look at Chesapeake Bay Program data, which is the data you saw tonight about forest loss. We also, the previous administration funded an effort by the Chesapeake Conservancy to look across our entire county and tell us where we've lost trees and where we could put them back. And we're going to be releasing sometime over the next 6 months those maps. They're going to be interactive online, and they're going to show you exactly where this third party, Chesapeake Conservancy, well known for their satellite imagery analysis and analytical tools, tells us you should put trees here. It's in the right place in the county to do it. So we think that if we set the market price correctly, the forest mitigation banks will come in. Prince George's County raised theirs. They have a lot of forest mitigation banks. Our banks are broken.
Okay, thank you. And this is a question that I just wondered, this is going to be a big strain on all your resources and your personnel, and how's it going to go? I mean, I hope that we have the resources and personnel to enforce this and to carry it out. Thank you.
We did add some positions in planning zone. There'll probably be more requested, but I hope not. And also inspections and permits for environmental inspectors.
Hi, I'm Sue Venter, and I live in Riva Trace. And several years ago, the county very nicely came in and planted many young trees along Riva Parkway and around, I'm not sure where all the spots were. But because of the nearsighted populace in there, they insist that it look like a golf course. And the landscape company comes in and piles bags and bags of mulch around these baby trees, these young trees. Well, now, many of those trees are dead or dying because of this practice. And I was hoping that you could, and hopefully the county government is not doing this in their care of trees in our parks or whatever, but I would hope that you would educate these landscape companies that mounding up mulch around trees just to make them look pretty kills them. And it's a practice that you see all over the county.
We need you to summarize your comment, please.
And I'd like to see you take some effort to get the word out to these companies that it is a damaging, and all they end up doing is taking down these dead trees. Thank you.
I will speak to my brother-in-law, who's an arborist.
Thank you.
Hi, Megan Roberts-Satinsky from Crownsville. I wanted to know, what was the county's intent with respect to the application of this new bill to development projects that are either in the pipeline or potentially will be in the pipeline? The grandfathering language in the draft bill is a little confusing about what it's intended to apply to.
Sure, the grandfathering language in the draft bill applies to, I believe that it's any project that has approval at one of the stages in the development plan submission. So there are multiple approvals whenever a development comes in. So if a development has already received from planning and zoning approval for, say, their sketch plan, their first plan, then they would be grandfathered in under this bill.
So it's not for the application, it's the actual approval.
Correct.
Thank you for the opportunity, County Executive, to join me. My name is Bernie Robinson from Glen Burnie, Maryland, also known as Bernie from Glen Burnie. Some of my multiple community involvements, including involvement with the public water access for Anne Arundel County, which I promote, as well as I was a past member of the Maryland Committee for Children and Youth. I was chairman of the Purpose Committee forming the first Governor's Youth Council for the benefit of our children and youth and their education. Also spent 10 years as treasurer for the Association of the United States Army, and I know how the veterans would appreciate more forestation, not to mention access to our waterways for repair and mental health, as well as our students' education. So, 3 comments, questions, and then 1 recommendation. Number 1 comment, I want to commend you on your strong efforts in what you're doing now, and it's about time, gentlemen, and I strongly support what you're doing. Certainly the right thrust for the environment, for the community, and our future generations. Question? How does Anne Arundel County compare currently to the Maryland guidelines for reforestation?
Well, right now we use the statewide law. And the statewide law on not just reforestation, but conservation on every development site, fee and lieu, it's broken. That was kind of our point tonight. And while it's broken all across Maryland, for some reason in Anne Arundel County, it's broken even more. So we're fixing the state law with our local law.
Okay, so does that mean we are not up to snuff to state law where it should be, or state law needs to improve?
So you've got, okay.
No louder.
State law needs to improve.
Straight law needs to improve. Okay. Question number 2 is.
You've got about 5 seconds left for all of your
Okay,
questions.
state number 2 would be what about the impact of deforestation on the Chesapeake Bay preservation and improvement issues? Because I believe that's a legal requirement as well.
Yeah, land use is the most important thing that determines water quality. The best thing for the bay is preserving trees. The second best thing is putting a building on top of a parking lot, where a parking lot used to be. So in this bill, you're gonna see disincentivizing greenfield development, that's what we call development on trees and open space, and incentivizing redevelopment. And there's gonna be other efforts under our administration to do the exact same thing, incentivize redevelopment.
Excellent. The last quick comment is a suggestion to reinforce, you're probably doing it already, but to put more public media, educate the public as to these great values that you are presenting tonight. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Good evening. My name is Tim Stevens. I'm from Severna Park. I'd like to reiterate the congratulations and I'll say praise and encouragement to continue on the efforts. I'm very impressed with the things that you guys have done. What I'd like you guys to talk a little bit about is the law is one piece of, or one tool in your toolbox to do some of this. You indicated previously that there was funds that supposedly were supposed to take care of some things, and it's like, what happened to those funds? So there's always the budget side of things and then the enforcement side of things. I really would like to hear a little bit more about those pieces. I also commend you on some of the things that you're doing about the incentivizing piece, because I think that's another part of the puzzle. But if you could talk a little bit about the enforcement and a little bit about how the budgeting aspect to support that would go, I'd appreciate it.
You signed the budget.
Well, I guess the question is how broad to go with it. On forest conservation specifically, it's pretty narrow. There are lots of things in the budget for the Chesapeake Bay, and there's a lot of work that Matt's doing on these erosion sediment control and construction sites that we'll maybe doing another town hall meeting on, the work on that. On the forest conservation, that's not a big budgetary requirement for us, right?
No.
The money comes from, hopefully, the people who are taking down the trees.
Yeah, and I think the question was, how do you complete the picture for the Chesapeake Bay? So I'll just give you a couple more numbers. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on stormwater practices to stop stormwater pollution, something you can do after you preserve the trees. We have spent, I just checked this morning, $250 million, thank you taxpayers, on improvements to our wastewater treatment plants, and they are about to receive an award as being world-renowned wastewater treatment plants.
That happened today. There was a wonderful lunch where the staff from each of our wastewater treatment plants were there, and they each got their national award for being for not having any violations for X number of years. Some of them as much as 22 years. So we're fortunately a leader. But the real story, I think, is that they've done a good enough job with all of these nutrient enhancement technology that they've added to our treatment facilities, that's the part of our TMDL goals that we're meeting. That's why our WIP 2 will probably meet. That was the low-hanging fruit. The more difficult stuff is what we're talking about now.
Really quick, before we have more questions, two things. Just a reminder, when you're asking your question, get your mouth as close to that mic without touching it. It's a little awkward, but the mic hears you so much better. Two, we have a lot of people, our line for questions is still growing. We only have about 30 minutes left, and so I'm going to ask you to try to keep your questions to a minute, not two, so we can speed up and try to get everyone done.
Hello, my name is Justin Blessett. I'm here on behalf of Chesapeake Regional Association of Student Councils under the Board of Education of Arundel County. I just wanted to say we are definitely open to a partnership with your office, and I've heard multiple people up here talk about educating students on forest conservation and everything. I just wanted to make you guys aware that our current administration under our president, vice president, and multiple elected officers, we are definitely aware of forest conservation. We have multiple environmental partnerships, and we are definitely open to a partnership with you guys.
Yes, so President Connor Kern is been very active, and I want to let you know, and you can go back to him if you want, that we have a seat on our Citizens Advisory Committee for the General Development Plan from your organization, the student, and the student who was in that seat has had to resign, so we're looking for another replacement, and maybe you're the one. Thank you.
1 minute now. Good evening. I'm Mike Lofton. I live in Harwood. I'm the founding board chair of Growth Action Network. And first, I want to commend you, certainly for doing this, but for seeking public opinion and input prior to introduction of the bill. And I would urge you to make that SOP for land use policies. I think you'll get valuable input, and you'll also get public buy-in in support of these endeavors. So bravo to you on that one. So I live near a farm, on a farm. I'm not a farmer. I know the county executive is. I routinely see large parcels being logged, mature trees cut down, hauled away on trucks. I don't know where they're going. We pay farmers to extinguish development rights. Can we put these trees in these conservation banks? Can we pay farmers to not cut the trees down? These are mature trees. They're doing their $1 million job. Let's not cut them down. So that's my idea.
Let me just say something on that most of the farms that have, or most of the properties that have large tracts of forest are encouraged to manage the forests, and so as part of the forest management plan, the forester comes in and they actually recommend that certain trees get cut, and they mark them, and there's different ways to do that. We're not allowed to clear cut, and we're not allowed to convert forest into farmland in Anne Arundel County. It's virtually impossible to get a permit to do that. Hopefully farmers aren't clear cutting. We'll talk about that later.
Don't know if they are or they're not, but nonetheless, there are big mature trees that are being taken down, and if that's what we're trying to get to. We have a lot of those. Don't waste them.
Susan Martinez from Hillsborough, where Quiet Waters Park is. And my question is, will there be part of the bill that will refer to the types of trees that are used for replanting? So often you see wonderful trees coming down and we see Bradford here after Bradford here after Bradford here. So is there a way to force them to put something as good as what they took out?
I'll let you answer that because you're the expert. But over at CERC, Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, we were over there where they have their mitigation plan, where they're doing a lot of research about what trees to put next to what other trees. And if you're interested in the topic, they're the experts.
Yeah, and we don't need the bill to say that, to be that specific. Anne Arundel County actually uses the statewide forest conservation manual, which tells the development community, here's the calculation, and here are the ways you replant trees. We have the ability to change that manual and write one for our own county. It may be something that we look into after we pass this bill.
Please do.
I'm Mike Labasco. I live in Odenton. Question for you, Matt. Is it possible to get a copy of the forest conservation worksheet you were showing on the screen? Is it
Absolutely.
How do we do that?
Send me an email.
You got it. And the second question I have, was there ever an economic analysis done on the effect on property values? For instance, I'm thinking like a small mom and pop owned property, 10 acres, one's forested, one's not. Seems to me there's going to be a big disparity in who's going to get, affected more with this legislation. Has that been considered?
That is such a great point, so thank you for bringing it up. We did not show you the full breadth of the legislation. While the hypotheticals I showed you there apply to a 100-acre parcel, those numbers that I showed, we are not changing the rules of the ballgame for 5 acres and less. Mom and pop properties are protected. There's a slight increase from 5 to 10 acres, slight increase in the conservation requirements, a bigger increase from 10 to 25, a bigger increase from 25 to 50, and then anything over 50, this is where we're losing our forest. This is where we lost 90% of our forest from 2017. Anything over 50 acres, you're held to a very high standard.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Matt Liptak. I'm from Severn, and I started a Facebook page called Friends of Severn Run National Environmental Area. I just had a quick question. Has there, forgive me if it's ignorant because I came in late and didn't see the presentation, but has there been an effort to work with the state to maybe increase the 1,600 acres or 1,700 acres of the Severn Run NEA to decrease fragmentation and just increase the forest boundary for the creek and stuff?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
Has there been any effort to work with the state to increase the forest around that NEA, even though it's state land? Could the county and the state work together to increase contiguous forests in that area? Or?
I'm hearing it tonight.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, not yet.
Okay,
But,
I was just curious.
Yeah, no, send us an email and
okay.
make a proposal.
Thank you.
Matt Minahan from the Neighbors of the Mayo Peninsula. Two quick questions. I'm wondering what you're hearing from the development community in response to this. And the second question is, why not no net loss?
So on the, that was my first question as well, but the second one was my first one. and pretty much we wanted a bill that could pass. Is the answer, is we need to get 4 votes, and when I was concerned about that, what made me feel better about it was looking back that we would have had no net loss, right, had this been in effect. So it's a pretty powerful tool. The development community, we've got I'm meeting with them next with MBIA, Maryland Building Industry Association, and you're actually meeting with them also tomorrow, right? So they have the bill, they're reviewing it, and they're gonna have comments on it. We'll see.
We're thrilled you're doing it. It's exactly the right thing to counterbalance and correct all the mistakes of the last 20 years here. So please forge ahead. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Niebel. I'm the incoming executive director of Smooth Riverside Trust. And hi. So as you mentioned before, that FCA funded grant program has been stopped. Sorry, can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. So, as you mentioned before, that FCA-funded grant program has been mostly depleted, and we've had a lot of success in the last couple of years protecting hundreds of acres of forest. So I'm wondering if you actually managed to get that 100,000 acre fee, how are you going to allocate that fee?
It's all going to go to you. Just kidding.
What I would say is step one is to pass the bill. This is going to be the next 3-4 months of my life. So step one is to pass the bill, and step two is the budget and figuring out how much we can offer up to the Chesapeake Bay Trust. So your Scenic Rivers Land Trust, Scenic Rivers Land Trust actually gets that money through a grant vehicle from the Chesapeake Bay Trust, the license plate folks. We give them a lot of the Forest Conservation Fund, and you are just a very successful applicant. So I would love to see that program continue, but step two is down the road.
Thank you.
And I would say one of the great things about Scenic Rivers Land Trust is that when they acquire a parcel, they're very careful about making sure that it's going to have a big environmental impact, an important piece of land.
Hi, I'm Laura Lutz, and I live in Mayo. And I first want to second what an earlier person commented on, expanded a little. If you don't address maintenance of newly planted trees and make that part of the deal and address the cost and the mechanisms for doing that, a lot of these plantings will fail and not achieve what you're trying to do. So I have two questions, because I don't understand how far this bill goes in addressing these, or whether this is more of a policy issue. I'm aware of situations in the past where the fee in lieu was used not to replant trees, but to put existing forests into preservation. I personally have some problems with that because it doesn't address deforestation. You're still losing the forest that the fee was paid for. Would this bill either allow that or disallow for that?
Yeah, so we have a question out. It's a very complicated question, and so we've asked the Attorney General to answer that for us. There are many options, remember, if you have to replant: on-site, off-site, pay a private landowner for a forest mitigation bank, do fee in lieu. Fee in lieu is pretty clear. We can use that for preservation, and that's a lot of what the Chesapeake Bay Trust funding does. The forest mitigation bank, we don't think we can. We think that it has to be, landowners have to offer up open land, plant trees on it to qualify for a credit. But we're asking the Attorney General his opinion on that.
And my other question is, if a fee in lieu is paid for the replanting of trees, will those newly planted trees be put in the watershed that's impacted by the development to trigger the fee?
That's always the goal. And there's, I always forget, but there's 10 or 12 priority areas to do it. You know, on-site is the best, off-site within the watershed, off-site forest mitigation bank in the watershed. Then you go to the county, and if you really fail, you go to the State Forest Conservation Fund. We don't go to the State Forest Conservation Fund. We stay within the county. But if we think what will happen, and we fix the market for these banks, I think you're going to see landowners with 2,500 square feet all over the place raise their hand and say, sure, I'll plant the trees.
Now, you're not looking to depend just on the market. I mean, I guess that's one thing, the private market, but would open county land be a candidate for replanting sites as well?
Just a step ahead of you.
I have a whole plan for that.
We talk about that, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're doing an analysis right now of all of our county-owned properties, because we would like to, I hope, create a county-owned and operated forest mitigation bank, not for the development community, but for our own projects, for our school board of ed projects, for our recreation and parks projects. We got to put our foot forward and comply with this law too.
Hi, I'm Paul Figueroa. I said last week and addressed you and basically said that I measure your mistakes. Most of the land north of Route 50 has already been developed. I have seen and measured the development on the smaller forested areas and have come up with the conclusion that they cause just as much damage when they're removed as the larger ones. My question tonight is, why is it that the smaller subdivisions that cause the more damage are not specifically included within this bill?
Or, in other words, you think they should be?
Yes.
Okay, well, we will note that, but I will let you answer.
Yeah, it's data. So I agree that Anne Arundel County is an interesting place if you look from a satellite. In your neck of the woods, Paul, there's not a lot of land left. It is all developed. In other places, it's wide open. Around Fort Meade, it's all forested. And so this is a bill that treats all of Anne Arundel County. And whenever we looked at the data from 2017 that Planning and Zoning helped me pull, we found 90% of our net forest loss was on projects greater than 50 acres. We lost over 100 acres on 2 projects alone. One of them you saw on the screen today, Brandon Woods. 2 projects alone, over 100 acres net forest loss. So that's the answer why we phased this in and said we're not going to change the rules on the small sites. We're going to change them on the larger sites.
Well, I kind of would like you to rethink that, because this is really a big issue. Because that's, again, I measured the mistakes, and I can see the impacts on the smaller 5-10 acre subdivision have a much larger impact on the water quality. Thank you very much.
Or to be more specific, Marsh Landing.
There you go.
Good evening, George Pratt. Was just thinking back through this bill and
I'm going to need you to lift the mic up.
A little too tall. Was thinking back through this bill coupled with some impact fees that were passed earlier in the year. And then with increased impact fees, it's making development more expensive, which is decreasing the value of raw land. And that's choking supply and resulting in higher home prices, eventually down the road as an externality, negative externality. This increased forest conservation thresholds within this bill are trying to redirect development to already unforested areas, as the term has been used tonight, and redevelopment capable areas. This will slow development to parcels of land where then it is not financially possible to develop. So with those 2 scenarios, eventually we see that we have fewer impact fees collected, less tax revenue, and fewer new streams of revenue being created and realized by the county. I'd like to know your vision for where the county will be in 2 to 3 years, when if these all couple together and snowball, we have people, businesses, and jobs not immigrating to the county, but emigrating away from Anne Arundel County.
Well, that's a big question. I mean, it's what's the fiscal impact of development? How much do we want, even for just economic reasons, apart from quality of life and health and all that? And we're going to be looking at those numbers again. They get looked at periodically. I believe that developers tend to work regionally. Not all, some are local folks, but they operate regionally. And they do argue that fees are too high and therefore it's going to have this negative effect. Now, the last administration dropped the sewer and water connection fee by about 30%. The argument was we needed to spur development in the county. We came in and we have not raised impact fees. I think it's the sewer and water connection fee that we've raised to start bringing it back to where it was. And we may raise impact fees. In fact, we're looking hard at that as well. But I believe that Anne Arundel County's economy is so good that development interests really do want to build here, and that we can drive a harder bargain than we have and still survive economically, but time will tell.
My question by saying you can have scientists attach dollar amounts to the value of a forest, but as far as I'm concerned, the value of forest is priceless. You cannot put for our overall well-being and happiness, which should be number 1. But my question is, as I talk to my neighbors and friends about this bill, I understand the impact on the Chesapeake Bay, and I heard a reference to air, but could you expound a little bit more on our current air quality and how this will affect our air quality. So we'll have talking points that will help support the legislation.
Yeah, I mean, in your fact sheet, there's one data point there about cars and how many emissions from how many cars we could have saved had we saved the had we saved the 2,700 acres of forest over the last 7 years, how much that would have offset. But then there's also, beyond emissions and carbon sequestration, there's also something called particulate matter, PM 2.5. There's lots of science out there. I didn't put anything in the fact sheet, but this particulate matter that causes asthma, may cause cancers in some populations, that is alleviated with the trees. So that's a talking point, and we can get you data on that.
So the trees absorb this particulate matter? Is that the way?
They knock it right out of the air.
While we're on talking points and other great impacts of trees, I was driving back from the Eastern Shore recently, and I listened to a podcast on NPR called Hidden Brain. Some of you might have listened to some Hidden Brain podcasts, and I think it was about a week ago that this one ran, and it was all about somebody who had done a lot of research on how nature impacts human beings, because we came from nature originally, and studies with amazing results of just a little bit of green, a little bit of trees, how it reduces depression and it reduces crime and it improves health and mental health in so many ways that when we start measuring in Anne Arundel County every piece of legislation and measuring the success of government based on the health and wellness of our people, we're going to look back and we're going to say this forest conservation bill really, really had a positive impact.
My name is Doug Myers. I live in Arnold, and I would like to both support the bill, but also have you think about some synergistic effects that maybe could be gained for forests writ large by looking very carefully at the MS4 program, regardless of the puny permit you're going to get from Department of Environment that will let you do pretty much whatever you want to. I think you need to take a very strong look at actually your own data about tree planting as compared to urban BMPs and what best for the buck you get in those investments. I think our MS4 program in the county should concentrate on tree planting wherever and whenever we can. I think anybody who owns more than an acre of land in the room should raise their hand and say, please plant trees on my property. It's one of the things that was a missed opportunity when we did the impact fee for stormwater and didn't advertise the availability of folks to offer their own land for discounts. And I think that's a program that really needs to be explored. And the second thing would be to also reach out to our federal agency folks at Fort Meade and NSA, who are largely the drivers for a lot of the development, and ask for their help in protecting forests in the county that they work in and live in. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Melanie Hartman Davis. And yes, I'm here with Maryland League of Conservation Voters, and as you know, I'm also an architect. Can you hear me? No. I have to eat the mic.
Yes.
All right. So, not only do I stand and voice and advocate for the environment on a statewide basis, but I'm also an architect. So I know and anticipate and know what you're going to hear from developers and engineers. And I would like to say that they need to step up to the challenge. Anne Arundel County is far behind both in our planning strategies and our building science and our land development. There is so much out there that can be done and should be done, and this is the tool, one of the tools that we need to challenge our developers and our builders and everybody out there who's involved in the design process to step up. So thank you.
And I would not assume that they won't. They don't all agree with each other anyway, but I know that one of the things they like is consistency and to be able to make a business plan and then follow through on that plan. So once the rules have changed, the rules have changed, and they will.
First of all, great job. I think this bill is long overdue, as you pointed out. But first question I have is, you mentioned the greenways, and which were developed back in 2002. So I was curious if you did have any data on how many of those were already lost to development or already protected. And then the second question is about the forest mitigation bank requirements, and if those are already part of county law or state law. It sounded like from a previous answer. And I asked that because, you know, having 10 quarter-acre little banks is, I think, not nearly as good as having, say, larger banks providing that same amount of acreage of forest.
Yeah, so I'll take the second one first. You're absolutely right. We would like to see large banks. It's just I don't think that citizens understand they can be part of the solution at only 2,500 square feet. I think that if we got that word out and the price was right, a lot of 2,500 square feet back lots would stand up, would raise their hands. I don't know if anyone in this room would, but I would. And then your first question was
Greenways.
Greenways, yeah. So thanks. So greenways are really exciting. Councilwoman Hare, one of the things we're really excited about is we haven't talked about a lot of the master plans that planning and zoning will develop as part of our big general development plan. One of them that may be ready to go very soon, sorry to steal your thunder, Steve, but is green infrastructure, a new greenways map. It'll be ready to go at some point. And so what I put up there was the 2002 greenways map, but there's a new one under development. So the question about do you know which areas in the greenways were developed and which weren't? It's my understanding that Steve and his team are going parcel by parcel developing a new greenways map. So we're really excited to see that.
Hey, Ben Alexandro. I'm with the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, but I also live in Crofton. For those that know Crofton, the last few years, tons of forests have come down, you know, as they're putting up royal farms next to other royal farms. And we're all stuck in traffic out there, so I have a personal vested interest in this, so I'm really, really excited for it. Professionally, it's not only the call we get most often to our office from residents of being upset about trees coming down, but also we've been working on the state level on something similar to this for a long time, and the opponents seem to be very good at confusing the issue, throwing in false data, delaying, all these different tactics to try to run out the clock when we try to pass it on the state level. How are you going to be able to be better defended against these attacks from the opposition to derail this, you know, great initiative that you're putting forward?
I'll hand it to the boss in just a second, but I look around this room and I'm amazed. And if this room shows up on October 7th, whenever we have a hearing, there you go.
Yeah, I agree. I'm very confident that this bill will pass. We're here to get it right. There may be some changes in what's in there now, but the public's behind this. A lot of the business community's behind this. That, you know, people love the natural beauty of this county, and they get it. They get that we need to clean up the Chesapeake Bay. So, long time coming, and it's going to happen.
It looks like we are out of questioners, which is perfect timing. We've got about 4 minutes left for closing statements. So the first thing I want to do is invite Senator Alford up and give her a chance to say a couple words.
First of all, I just want to say thank you to the county executive and Matt for such a wonderful presentation. I feel better informed having come here tonight, so thank you for providing the opportunity for everybody. Secondly, I just want to introduce myself. If you live in the Annapolis area or South County area, I have the privilege of representing you in the Senate. I serve on the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee, the Money Committee, as well as one of two Maryland senators on the Tri-State Chesapeake Bay Commission. So this conversation is happening at the county level, state level, and I assure you it's happening in the watershed as well. It's so critical. I want to give a brief update on what we're doing at the state level. The county executive joked, and I'm here to concede that he won our bet back from the campaign that the county's moving at a faster pace than the state, but we're still making progress. We were able to pass a study bill to bring the other counties who are a little further behind than us on improving the Forest Conservation Act. It was first passed by the state in 1992, so it's about time that we update that law, and we're going to bring everybody on board for that. We also were successful in passing a fee in lieu of bill at the state level to help clean up some of the ambiguity other counties and this county, frankly, were facing. And one of many other great things we did for the environment this year, I could go on, but we also fully funded program open space for the first time in a long time. So it's a big win for the environment. But we're not done. My office is working on a number of initiatives. I heard it come up quite a bit tonight on empowering folks to be better stewards of their own land. So we're looking at the tax credit system to do that, as well as better preserving smaller tracts of land. So there's currently a state credit. If you have 5 acres or more, we want to see how can we provide a little more incentive for people who maybe have 2 or 2.5 acres to preserve their forested land. So working in partnership, and I can assure you that this is an incredible partnership. The county executive and I have a standing meeting once a month to talk about these issues and other issues, and we're going to continue on this path together. But I'm going to be around for a little bit longer if people have state-specific questions that I can answer for you. But I'm so excited, and this is one bet I am really happy to lose. So thank you, Mr. County Executive.
You have something you want to say in closing, and then we'll hear from the county executive.
I just want to say I took 7 pages of notes, so thank you all for participating. That was incredibly helpful. I really appreciate all the comments, the questions. I have a few things now. I want to go play with that spreadsheet, actually. So this has been tremendous. I really appreciate all of you coming out tonight. This is exactly what government should look like, and I want to actually thank the administration for sharing this information and sharing the draft bill and whatnot with the county council members in advance so that we can all talk about it and have these kinds of conversations with you all in advance. So thank you very much, and I will also stick around if anybody's got any other county council related questions, any District 7 issues, or if you'd like to talk a little bit more about this with me. Thank you.
Believe it or not, I got nothing to say, except thank you for coming. I'm really glad you showed up.